How did they begin to tackle the problem?
Well, the first thing they did was they sat down and decided that they were going to provide medical services for all these people.
They did?
Yeah.
That was the basic decision?
That's the basic decision. Once they decided that, they had to get on with the job. I think the real leaps where you noted qualitative changes in the medical services, the earliest one came at the beginning, of course, when they decided that they're going to treat all the people and provide a health service for everybody. But the second period came during the Korean War. And there was inaugurated at that time one of the famous mass movements, the patriotic health movement, getting rid of the four pests, hygiene among
What were the four pests?
There was flies, mosquitoes, rats, and sparrows. But we relieved the sparrows, we re-liberated them. They weren't as culpable as they should have been, were thought to be. And we substituted bedbugs.
Ah.
But, and then there was a whole educational movement on hygiene, both personal and environmental hygiene. Control of water, supplies, wells, feces control, fertilizer, composting, and personal habits. You had to change the whole concept of a people's hygienic mentality. After being so subjected to superstition and lack of knowledge of where diseases came from. Well, I think that period laid a very strong foundation so that this habit took hold, and at many times during the year now, at holidays, spring festivals, all there's big house cleaning, general environmental cleanup, and so forth. The second period, I think, was during the Great Leap Forward.
What happened there?
The Great Leap Forward contributed mostly in medicine to a number of things. One of the major things it did was highly organize the rural population so that on the one hand they could be helped, on the other hand they could help themselves. Instead of dealing with an individual family or a cooperative of 50 people, here you had a commune of 20,000, 30,000, or 50,000, and you could approach them as a unit, as a collective. So if you had any preventive work you wanted done, or vaccinations done, or treatment of any of the chronic diseases done, it was very simple to handle them as a unit. And that's where most of the eradication of diseases really climaxed into a dramatic result. For example, it was already by that time that we got rid of smallpox, cholera, plague, venereal disease, Kala-Azar. To eliminate venereal diseases is like one of the prime things to do is to change the social system. You have to cut out the economic roots of prostitution. You have to raise the living standards of the people. You have to educate them. In China, they were more at a disadvantage because you had the whole feudal oppression of women. But when women are sold into prostitutions from early childhood and people making money and profit out of this, and the morals of a society degenerating around a money nexus, you're not going to be able to eradicate this.
Nope.
With the youth growing up and having a new ideals and new moral incentives and commitments and so forth, women being liberated, marriage laws taking effect, the economic equality of women being recognized and worked out, the roots were cut out again, and the people were very cooperative. We treated them with regular antibiotics, penicillin, and the other treatments. That was quite simple. The technical parts are quite simple.
The other tremendous problem in China, surely, was drugs, opium. What is the situation in regard to opium today?
Well, it was a terrible problem to start with. And by the time of liberation, this problem was much more extensive because the armies back and forth, Japanese penetration throughout the country. But at the beginning, after liberation, one of the first things that was done was to stop opium growing completely. And then we set up medical clinics for treatment. And fortunately, opium was much easier to handle. Opium addiction was easier to handle. We used, one of the very cheap methods was just using magnesium sulfate solutions, 25% in injections. That would give a relaxation of the muscles and help tide over part of the thing, and extremely cheap and feasible acceptable to the addicts and easily delivered by the medical personnel or paramedical personnel.
Dr. Ma told me that the Cultural Revolution gave a big impetus to the medical profession. For example, several new applications were found for the old practice of acupuncture. Though the incidence of polio is very low in China, acupuncture is now being used to help those paralyzed by polio, like this boy. The Chinese doctors claim that acupuncture is helping polio patients to recover more quickly. This teenage boy was also severely paralyzed by polio. After 20 minutes, the needles were withdrawn and the patient practices walking. Another entirely new use of acupuncture is for severe spinal injuries caused by industrial accidents. Most of these patients have been bedridden for many years. Others have been unable to move except in a wheelchair. Today, after a long course of deep acupuncture, some of these patients, the doctors told me, are regaining the partial use of their legs. Of course, the most dramatic medical breakthrough has been the discovery 3 or 4 years ago that acupuncture could be used as an anesthetic in operations. More than 500,000 major operations of this kind have now been performed. No one, even in China, quite understands how it works. Practice, in this case, has moved ahead of theory. It is quite common for patients to be given fruit during the operation to quench their thirst. I watched a dozen or more major operations in which the patients, with no sign of pain, remained quite conscious and could talk with me. It was an utterly astonishing experience. This was a relatively minor operation for a hernia. In the West, a general anesthetic would normally have been given. The patient was able to help himself off the operating table. I had a brief talk with him. You've just come off the operating table. How do you feel? Quite comfortable. Did you have any pain during the operation? No, not much pain. And there's some discomfort at all or not? No. Did you get thirsty? No. And it was quite a long operation. How long did it take? More than an hour. And you were quite conscious all the way through? He was conscious, yes. I mean, you were quite conscious all the way through the... Yeah. And you could talk. I saw you being fed oranges, yes. And you're now going back to your ward, and when do you think you'll be able to have an ordinary meal?
You can have it right now.
Oh, you can have it right now? Oh, are you hungry? You're hungry, yes. These children are deaf, or almost deaf. They were either born deaf or lost their hearing when they were very young. Most of them, when they came to this school, could not speak, and it is known as a school for deaf mutes. It is one of about 15 such schools run by the Army Medical Corps. Recently, during the Cultural Revolution, the Army medical people began to think that acupuncture might be able to restore, at least partially, the hearing of deaf children. Both Western and Chinese medical advisors have said that this treatment is still experimental and should not raise the hopes of deaf people. It may be some years before it can be properly assessed and applied outside China. From time to time, the army doctors test the children's hearing.
注意，开始。调息下来没有？记了。注意，开始。再来一次。
As the children begin to hear, they must also learn how to speak and must learn to recognize differences in pitch. These children have been here for only a few months. Most will stay for 3 years. Former students sometimes come back to the school to share their experiences. This girl says she is now able to go to a normal school. This older boy tells how he was taught to read blueprints. He is now making wooden molds at a steel factory. None of them speak quite normally, but they can be readily understood. This girl welcomes us to a student show. Chinese medical workers are the first to admit that there is still much to do. Today, the average life expectancy in China is just twice what it was before the revolution. So now they say they must give more attention to the growing number of older people, a problem that arises from the extraordinary improvement in the general health of the Chinese population.